Good afternoon, and welcome back to another session of Rumination with Andrew. This is a program or a podcast, I should say, in which we delve into important matters, important issues of the day. Now, I just want to say here that, you know, this podcast is dedicated to persons who want to think and who want to think outside of the box. I know that, generally speaking, unfortunately, our species, that's the species of the human race, we tend to want to be followers more than leaders. We like to follow the crowd. We like to know that, we are among what the majority of people within our community are saying. We don't like to stand out. We don't like to be different. We don't like to think for ourselves. We tend to want to have people think for us, and that is one of the problems that our world is now facing. People are not courageous. They're not willing to stand up for what is right because they know that the consequences might not be what they had bargained for. So I understand perfectly well that, there are some of you who might shy away, or you might criticize what I'm saying because you think that, oh, this guy is making a noise over things that are unimportant. But they might be unimportant to you because you're not following, you're not reading, you're not thinking deeply enough, you're not thinking critically enough, so to be able to discern and to understand what is happening in our current world. Now, if you're following the news, I think some very concerning things are happening, and particularly as it regards to freedom of speech and freedom of expression. Now, it's very, very important for us to know that freedom of speech is deeply rooted in the Judeo-Christian religion. That's the Protestant Judeo-Christian religion. I am not talking about now Roman Catholicism. We know that the Roman Catholic papacy, which many people think, belongs to the Christian world, did not support, did not endorse freedom of speech. And that is why Europe was thrust into many years, if not centuries, I should say, of dark ages, because they would not allow freedom of speech, particularly the reading of the Bible. Right? It is when people started to read the Bible that they realized that there were lots of errors that the Catholic Church taught, and they decided to challenge those sort of doctrines that they might have learned before. Now, there is a danger when church and state are merged together. When they wield their power together, it is not something that you and I would definitely, a society in which we want to live, because we understand that the arm of the church and the arm of the state together, both arms are going to result in unbearable persecutions. Now, having said that, I just wanted to highlight this here. Let me share my screen quickly so that I can share with you a comment made, some statements made by, Ellen G. White, and she was one of the co-founders of the Advent movement. That's the Adventist church in the world. Now, we have here the Pilgrim Fathers, and this is part 3. Let me see if I could make the page bigger. My eyes sometimes cannot read when the font is very small. So let me see if I can write. Let me see. Probably it's too big right now. Won't be able to read. All right, let me close this here. All right. Think I could read this. Let me see. Okay. Let me see if I could make it a little bit bigger. I beg your pardon. So just a little bit better. Wow. Okay. Yeah. So this is a little bit better here. Now we have Pilgrim Fathers Part 3 and Liberty of Conscience Established. Now, it says that in that grand old document, which are forefathers, referring to the forefathers of the United States, set forth as their Bill of Rights. And we know the Bill of Rights was written in 1789 and it was ratified in 1791. And may I just say something here? Now, the Bill of Rights, before it was written, what's his name? Thomas Jefferson was returning from France because he was Secretary of State in France. He was he spoke French fluently, so I'm sure that the US sent him there to be the ambassador. And France was a time the leading empire in the world at that time. It was a very great empire along with the British Empire. So when he witnessed what was happening there, the events that led up to the French Revolution, upon returning to the United States, he read the Constitution. That's the Constitution, which is not the Bill of Rights now, the Constitution, the U.S. Constitution. Having read it, he realized that it was the rights that were delineated in that Constitution, they were not sufficient. They were not specific in terms of dealing with individual rights. They were more generalized rights of freedom, right? So he decided that he and some of the other founding fathers would pen what is known now as the Bill of Rights, in which he sort of made more specific, right, the rights, the individual rights that all American citizens should have. Now, this is what is under, what should I say now, on the threat, right? I think Americans, if they're not careful, will eventually lose the Bill of Rights. And if you lose the Bill of Rights, then you're going to lose all the individual freedoms that you are now enjoying. Remember now that even the banning of slavery, the abolition of slavery, and the freedoms that were given to African Americans, all of those freedoms were expressed in the Bill of Rights. So if this document, if the Bill of Rights should be totally discarded, right, then we know that slavery, for example, could happen again on American soil. Now, I'm not saying it's going to happen, and it does not necessarily have to be racial slavery. It could be anybody being enslaved. Because remember now that when slavery started out first, it was, Europeans who were what they call the indentured laborers, right? They were the first slaves, but because of the fact that they were British citizens, they had some rights. So they would sometimes complain to the metropolis in Britain that the slave masters were, sort of abusing them, and they would be represented by the British monarchy at that time. Now, the African slaves, on the other hand, did not have anybody to defend them. So that is one of the reasons why the slave masters in the United States decided to traffic African slaves, because of, they would not be able to defend themselves, and neither would there be anybody in, that would defend them from, say Africa or from Europe. So we must understand that if we do not stand up in defense of the Bill of Rights, that we can lose all of our freedoms. But I think the founding fathers, the Thomas Jeffersons and so on, they understood that the first four, the first amendment to the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, the first, amendment, of course, they made sure that they articulated explicitly that freedom of speech and religion, freedom of religion and freedom of speech should be expressed therein. They understood very, very well that if you do not have freedom of religion and freedom to express your ideas, even if those ideas are repugnant. Now, I'm not saying now that you are going to endorse the killing of people, or, but, whatever your religion is, you should be able, once you're not foisting your beliefs onto other people, you should be able, if other adherents are there and they want to follow in that thinking, you have that right according to the Constitution. And that is why you have many different types of religions in the United States. You have different denominations within the Christian belief system in the United States, because there they can express their different beliefs openly and freely. We take these things for granted because, over the years, we have grown, many of us in the Western world, especially out of Europe, and including Europe, we have grown into that sort of culture, right? But it was not always the case, right? We know that in Europe, that was not the case. And even a short time in the United States too, right? When the Puritans came over, they had their own beliefs of what religion should be. Remember, you also had, in one case in the United States, Catholics could not come to the United States. They were forbidden, right? They were restricted. But eventually, they opened up and they were able to understand that freedom of religion encapsulates and includes all types and all forms of religion, right? And they were not just saying Catholics could not enter because they were, they hated Catholics. Well, they might have, but they had reasons, right, for hating the Catholic and the Anglican, the Church of England, because those two churches persecuted them. And they did some horrible things. And you just have to read the Spanish Inquisition, right? And all of those revolutions in Europe to see how the Catholic Church, with the arm of the state, inflicted severe persecution upon their people and also, foreigners, particularly the Jews. So what is happening in the Middle East now? Somebody had a program, I think it's Kim Iverson, in which she had a discussion on the fact, the title on her video was that Jews have been safer with, under Islamic rule than under living with Christians. And that might be true, because when you study the history of how they have been treated in Europe and to some extent in the United States, because when they first went to the United States, they also were not treated very well, and many of them, were persecuted, etc., etc. So, when we think that the U.S. is defending Israel, as she says she's doing, how true is that, right? And is it that because she wants to defend her, or she has an ulterior motive? That's for you to decide. But, I just wanted to say that to make sure that I stress this point, that it's very important that we understand what freedom of religion and freedom of expression mean. Because if you don't have freedom of religion, that is a time that you are inviting this sort of tyrannical society, because it is that ability, because people tend to be emotional. People tend to be, what should I say now, passionate advocates of the religion. And right now we're seeing, even in the political realm, that what we call the political right or the political left, it is, to me, it's a sort of political fundamentalism, which I call a secular religion. Because right now, those who are pro-Israelis and those who are pro-Palestinians, they have their own point, and they do not want to see the other side of the perspective. They just want to see their perspective, and they're emotionally charged. And some of them can result in violence. So we have to be careful. We must understand that religion and politics should never be combined, should never come together to form any sort of policies in our countries, in the Western world, that is, because in the other worlds, like in the Islamic world, that is what they do, right? And the United States, as I told you the last video, had a special mission, right? Because all empires, all world powers are set up by God. He's the one who set them up and he puts them down. And the United States was set up to be a model country in which freedom of religion and freedom of freedom of religion and politics and religion would not be merged together, but they would be separate, right? And that's why we talked about the two-horned beast that came out of the earth, which is the United States. And the two horns there are symbols of religious liberty and civil liberties, right? That they are distinct. They're not combined. They're not together. They should not be joined. They should never be joined. But we're seeing now that there is a subtle attempt to merge religion with the arm of the state, right? With civil liberties, and that is not what the United States was founded, was supposed to be. All right, so okay, so we have here in the grand old document which our forefathers set forth as their Bill of Rights, the Declaration of Independence. They declared, we hold these truths, right? I know that they are not just one truth, but these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal and that they are endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And the Constitution guarantees, the person here is saying here, in the most explicit terms, the inviolability of conscience. No religious test shall ever be required as a qualification to any establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. The framers of the Constitution recognized the eternal principle that man's relationship with his God is above human legislation and his rights of conscience inalienable. Reasoning was not necessary to establish this truth. And I want to repeat this. Reasoning was not necessary to establish this truth. And let me just say here, and you probably, might think that this guy's paranoid because he's always talking about the pandemic, but the pandemic can teach us a lot of things, right? And when you're talking about science and reasoning, when it comes on to the matters of the conscience, there are some things that are self-evident, right? And you don't have to test it by science. If somebody says that I don't want to take something because my conscience tells me not to take it, right? No government by any stretch of the imagination should force that person. I don't care how much research you have done by the most esteemed intellectuals or erudite scholars, that person's freedom of conscience must be secured, right? It does not have anything to do with reason. Okay, we are conscious of it in our own bosoms. It is this consciousness which, in duty to God, was superior to human enactments, and that man could exercise no authority over their consciences. It is an inborn principle which nothing can eradicate. Science, all right, not anything. Not your parents, not your governments, right? If you decide that you have a particular belief, it should be and ought to be respected. And this is what we call freedom of religion, freedom of expression. Now, if we cannot express ourselves freely and openly, then we can't have freedom of conscience. Because even in medicine, even in science, particularly the medical field, we talk about informed consent, that we should be able to sit and listen to what the scientists, the medical, authorities, doctors have to say. They need to give us sufficient information, the pros and the cons. And having listened to the pros and the cons, we'll be able to make our own choices as to what we want to do, as what we think is best for health. Not for someone to tell you that you have to do this. If you decide that you want to die, that should be your decision, right? The Bible, for example, says that he has given us two roads on which to walk, right? You either choose life or you choose death. It is God's desire that we choose life, but he does not force anyone. right? So if you choose that you want to die, if you want to curse him, if you want to blaspheme his name, and that is what freedom of choice and freedom of speech is all about. Even God, who is almighty, we find that people talk all manner of evil against him. Even in the academy, you can say anything you want to say about religion in the academy about God. And people speak about God in the most despicable way. But why can't we talk about Israel? Why can't we talk about the evolution theory, the theory of evolution? Why can't we talk about vaccines? Why are these things so why are they so special? Right? Freedom of expression means that you have the right to express your ideas openly, freely, and dispassionately. Right? And sometimes what you say might be offensive. And that is what it's all about. It's offensive to God when we speak badly about him. And he has all the power that in the universe to destroy us. But he doesn't. He gives us that freedom to do so. Okay. Now we are witnessing, let me come here to this, a situation on the college campuses. And I understand it's also from the kindergarten in the United States. But you know, the political newspaper brought this article some time ago. I think it was on I can't see the date here, but it was some weeks ago. It could be 2 weeks ago that I read this article. And the title of this article was that colleges under pressure to address anti-Semitism on campuses. So we have here that governors and political leaders in states are starting to press colleges to take more steps to quell anti-Semitism amid a surge due to the Israel-Hamas war. Now, this is interesting. This is to what Governor Kathy Hochul is saying. You cannot ignore these threats and hope that they go away, Hochul said. Talking about them, talking about prosecuting, talking about trying to foster some understanding, there should be a greater sense of empathy for these students. So she's concerned about the threats against, against Jewish students on the various campuses, university campuses in the United States. Now, this is concerning because they are suggesting that the presidents of these colleges should protect the civil rights of these students. And if they do not, then they might lose their funding, their economic funding, their grants, right? And all money is given to these universities. Now, this is a serious, threat. State authorities and FBI were investigating the threats, including one that said, if you see a Jewish person on campus, call them home and slit their throats. Now, one of the things that I find amazing is that this is coming according to them. And that's one of the reasons that we have to understand. We must take the news that comes from mainstream media with a grain of salt. So we're not saying that they're lying, and we can't say that what they're saying here is truthful. Right? It's only bizarre. It's bizarre that it's coming, and I'm not saying because it's coming from some of these Ivy League schools in America, like the Cornells and the Harvards, but it's bizarre that, they're coming from these colleges and that they are willing to say that they would want to slit the throats of students, almost like they're hooligans. Right? I find that to be interesting, to say the least. So this is something that we have to be concerned about, because if the colleges have to be, to begin to surveil their student population, how is it that we're going to have open discussions? How can teachers or professors interact with their students? And how will knowledge be held? Because one of the fundamental principles of education is to be able to have an open interaction, open debates. So there should be students in the class who should be allowed to express, disagreement with what is happening in Israel, as well as those on the other side. There are students who should be able to express disagreement with the Hamas or with the Palestinians, including hate speech. And I'm not endorsing hate speech, but that is a protected constitutional right. You don't have to like me, right? What you must do is respect my right to live. But we are seeing here where Washington is changing its policies, and it is, sort of, it is actually going to, it's actually suggesting to these colleges that they ought to protect the civil rights of students, of all the students on their campuses, which I find to be impossible. I don't think that, a university, unless it's going to be a war zone, unless it's going to be taken over by the FBI and members of the national security state, I don't see how they're going to be able to control people's thoughts, people's emotions, and people's perspectives. But you might know that. I don't. I can't understand what's going on. But this is something I wanted. This is an article I had pulled up some time ago also, and just want to share with you a brief, some of the paragraphs here and to discuss as much as we can. I can't go through the entire article in the interest of time. All right, so please bear with me. And the title of the article is by Nicholas Turse, and he talks about the military-industrial academic complex. Oftentimes we hear about the military-industrial complex, but in recent times we are hearing about the military-industrial scientific technological complex, and now we're hearing about the military-industrial academic complex. Now, historians say that Dwight Eisenhower, who had made the speech, the famous speech on the fact that America should be concerned and should guard against the uprise of the military-industrial complex, that he had included in his speech the military-industrial congressional complex, but he was warned against using congressional. So it means, therefore, that from the 1950s, I think he left, he demitted office in 1960, right, or 1961. I think from that time, that the Congress really was not representing the people, because President Eisenhower, he was president, so he had to have known what was going on in the inner sanctums of the military-industrial complex. Now, since 1961, thanks to President Dwight D. Eisenhower, we've all been cognizant of the unwarranted influence of the military-industrial complex in America. Later in that decade, Senator J. William Fulbright spoke out against the militarization of academia, warning that in lending itself too much to the purposes of government, a university fails its higher purposes, and called attention to the existence of what he termed the military-industrial academic complex, or what historian Stuart W. Leslie has termed the golden triangle of military agencies: the high-tech technology industry and research universities. While we might intuitively accept the existence of a military academic complex in America, defining and understanding it has never been simple, both because of its ambiguous nature and its dual character. In actuality, the military academic complex has two distinct arms. The first is the official, out and proud, but oft ignored, melding of the military and academia. Right, so here we're seeing that this author is suggesting, right, is intimating that there is a melding, a merging of the military and academia. Okay. And he talked about the fact that in the history, he gave the history of how, this whole matter of the melding of the military with academia, how it started. And he's suggesting here that it started all the way back from 1802 under the presidency of Thomas Jefferson. Something that is interesting because a lot of times we talk about the founding fathers and that they were against wars and that they thought wars, of course, which is rightly so, is the greatest enemy, the greatest threat against democracy or a republican form of government. Now, the author, begins to give, more recent history. And let me go here. It said, during World War II, as historian Roger Geiger has noted, educational institutions carrying out weapons development, not surprisingly, received the largest government research and development contracts. And listen to what he's going to say here. 6 of them, in particularly, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, right? And Ivy League, the California Institute of Technology, Harvard University, Columbia University, University of California at Berkeley, and Johns Hopkins University received then massive sums of more than 10 million each. That was a long time ago, so it was a lot of money in those days, right? Wasn't it? And it is by no coincidence that Johns Hopkins University during the pandemic was so much featured in the news. I hope you're making the connection. Following the war, military entities like the Office of Naval Research sought to establish, strengthen, and cultivate relationships with university researchers. By the time the ONR officially received legislative authorization to begin its work in August 1946, it had already entered into contracts for 602 academic projects, employing over 4,000 scientists and graduate students. So, I don't want anybody to tell me that science is not merged with the military-industrial complex. And I'm not saying that all science is, or all research topics are. What I'm suggesting here is that big research projects, large research projects, are definitely going to be merged because they require lots of money. And oftentimes, the university itself does not have all of that money. So it joins with big corporations and the military-industrial complex to ensure that those projects can be undertaken. Right? And this is what we have to understand, that there is no sphere of our lives in which the military-industrial complex has not yet found its way. Right? Even in the church. I mean, in 2008 and beyond, you had news, for example, suggesting that the CIA reads the pastor's sermons. Right? And if they say anything against wars or the wars that Washington is waging abroad, you can be, you can be followed, you can be punished. I'm not sure what the castigation would be. Right? But what it does mean here is that we have to think, we have to know that our world is controlled, and that much of the information that we're getting, even from the journals, the scientific journals and all of the journals that might be, that information might not be true. Now, I'm not suggesting here that everything is going to be false. But what I'm saying, you must read with a critical eye, and you also must look at the financial conflicts of interest before you make a decision. Now, look at what he's saying. He continues to speak, right? But MIT, which is the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, is far from alone. Today, the scale of interpenetration of military projects and academia is as dizzying as it is sweeping. According to a 2002 report by the Association of American Universities, almost 350 colleges and universities conduct Pentagon-funded research. Universities receive more than 60% of defense basic research funding, and the DoD is the third largest federal funder of university research after the National Institutes of Health and the National Science Foundation. All right. So our universities are not necessarily centers of learning, because the military is not concerned about your learning and about your education. It's more concerned about indoctrinating you into its belief. So many parents are sending their children, you know, and one of the things that is very interesting and very concerning is the fact that lots of these students, well, some of them do get grants, and that's good for them. If you can get a grant and be indoctrinated, then that's good, you know, because at the end of the day, you would have gotten free of cost. But when you have to pay huge sums of money to be indoctrinated, that's another matter. You must understand. And if you have kids in school, you must find a way that they get their grants, especially if they're going to these Ivy League or these, you know, top schools in the United States. And I'm sure that this is happening all around the world. It might not be the US military that is doing it, but it is possibly large corporate donors. And they are going to definitely, you know, have the big stick over your heads, of the professor's head, of the administrator's head, that they have to teach students, indoctrinate them in the way that they want them to be indoctrinated, and that they would not be aware of the world in which they live. So what's the purpose of an education? Maybe we should call it indoctrination instead of education. But the Department of Defense isn't only about the stick. As noted above, it spends most of its time directing research by bestowing plenty of carrots in the form of money, and sometimes indirectly credentials that lead to money. Take the National Security Agency, that's the NSA, the DoD Allied Intelligence Organization that runs the National Cryptological School, the Cryptologic School rather, which serves as a training resource for the entire Department of Defense. In addition to listening in on the globe and running its own school, the NSA doles out rather a seal of approval in the form of a CAE designation, Centers of Academic Excellence in Information Assurance Education, that puts other schools in the running for lucrative DoD Information Assurance Scholarship. You know, one of the things that's amazing, because, you know, if you do not get these huge grants, for example, chances are you're not going to be able to be competitive in the field of research. And in most cases, the professors would not be properly compensated for the job that they do. So you can understand why some professors, well, are going to be silent about this, because, you know, it helps them. And they can move along in their careers. And this is what the military does. So if you think it's only the soldiers that live comfortably overseas, right? Even within the United States, the military-industrial complex plays a pivotal role. Now, look at this paragraph here. Of course, grants of this size are small potatoes. We're talking about grants that universities get. When it comes to the DoD, big time schools get a whole lot more. So the big time schools like your Harvard and your MITs, right, and your California Tech and stuff like that, they get big bucks other than. And we always look at them with great respect. Oh, they have this huge endowment and all of that stuff, right? And we don't know sometimes behind the scenes how these things are playing out. And I'm not casting any aspersion on these universities. I just am sensitizing you to the realities and what's going on in our world. Because sometimes we do not think about these things because they're not in the mainstream media. They're not necessarily in books that we normally buy. And you have to go digging for these information if you really want to know what's going on. And many of us do not do that. We sometimes don't even have the skill to dig for the information that we need to dig for so that we can, we can be informed. As such, the DoD vow seems like a perfect place to settle a matter that failed to be resolved on the Bridge last season. Now, let me see if I can I think I'm going to leave this article, I'm going to post it in the description box because I don't want to go into a lot with you. You need to read for yourselves and begin to do your own thinking. I don't want to speak because a lot of times you speak, people tend not to want to believe. So it's best for you to read for yourself, reflect, cogitate on what is being said here so that you can find yourself better informed. Now, let's read these two last paragraphs. The military academic complex is merely one of many readily perceptible but largely ignored examples of the interesting militarization of American society. So there's no institution in the US that is not militarized. Right? And that is why now we can see where the presidents of these different universities are being asked by the Biden administration to protect students' civil rights. How would they protect the students' civil rights if they are not going to be militarized? They can't. Because not even a professor, and I have taught that on university campuses in the United States, and the professor will not be able, and I would not want that responsibility, to report on students who might not express views that is in SNCC or that are in SNCC with my views. My responsibility is to teach and to engage students and then to have debates. And then I might give my perspective, but it doesn't mean that my perspective is the perspective. While the Pentagon has long sought to exploit and exert influence over civilian cultural institutions, from academia to the entertainment industry, so even in the entertainment industry, that is also controlled by them. Today's massive budgets make its power increasingly irresistible. As I told you, in American university, and I think that also stands for the world, you either publish or you perish. And publishing, doing research, means that you have to have some money. And the university would not have all that money to give to you if it's not aligned with these big companies, these large corporations, and also the military-industrial complex. The Pentagon now has both the money and the muscle to alter the landscape of higher education, to manipulate research agendas. Let me read the word again, the expression again, to manipulate. So oftentimes you're reading these books, you're reading these journals, you're reading these magazines coming from these top universities, and you think because they're coming from these universities that they are dispassionate research findings, that they're objective in nature, but they're not for the most part. Right? Because you and I know that the purpose of corporations is to make a profit. The purpose of the military-industrial complex, as we have explored before, that's the US military-industrial complex, is to achieve full spectrum dominance. Never forget these three words, full spectrum dominance. Okay. So we have to change the course of curriculum and to force schools to play its rules. Moreover, the military research underway on college campuses across America has very real and dangerous implications for the future. It will enable or enhance imperial adventures in decades to come. It will lead to new lethal technologies to be wielded against the peoples across the globe, and I would say across America itself. It will feed a superpower arms race of one, only increasing the already vast military asymmetry between the United States and everyone else. It will make ever more heavily armed, technologically equipped, and armored U.S. war fighters over less attractive adversaries, and American and allied civilians much more appealing soft targets for America's enemies. None of this, however, enters the realm of debate, because they don't want any debate. Just like we're not having any debate on the war between the Israelis and the Palestinians, because the objective is clear and they do not want their objective or their agendas to be interrupted. Instead, the Pentagon rolls along, doling out money to colleges large and small. So it's not only the big universities, the Howards and the, what we call the HBCUs and all of these institutions, I'm sure, are getting their funding from the military industrial complex, expanding and strengthening the military academic complex and remaking civilian institutions to suit military desires as if this were but the natural way of the world. Right? So this is where we are going. This is the agenda that the military has. It wants to achieve full spectrum dominance. And for it to accomplish this goal, it has to condition its citizens. It has to condition the people or the peoples of the world. Right? And we've got to get our minds together. We've got to cogitate. We've got to think about these things. These are uncomfortable truths, but these are truths that we must be able to contend with. And I understand that many of us do not want to engage in these conversations because it's intellectually it is heavy. The food, this intellectual food, is too heavy for us to even think about. We can't digest it mentally or intellectually. It interrupts our comfort because we want to be comfortable in slavery or in what is leading towards human slavery. So I would like you to think about these issues that I've just presented to you. And I hope that you will understand that the Bible, and we read Revelation 13 in our last video, is true. And that this nation, called the United States of America, will eventually speak like a dragon. Started out as an innocent, pure form of the image of Christ, but it will eventually morph, it will eventually transition into having the spirit of the dragon. Thank you so much for joining. I hope that you will be present for another session, for another discussion in my next video. Have a fantastic day. All the best to you. Bye.